Is this a great game or what? Welcome to another episode with the Hall of Famer Tim Kirkshin. I'm Jeff Kirkshin, and today our guest is Steve Sparks. Steve Sparks is a broadcaster for the Houston Astros, but he's a former major leaguer, spent quite a bit of time in the minor leagues, and he tells us stories about Bob Gibson, Bob Feller, and Bob Uecker. Dad, some of these stories even you have never heard before.
Right. He made us laugh out loud a dozen times.
Oh,
he even brought a tear to our eyes.
Yes.
That's what great storytellers can do. And I knew about Steve Sparks long before all this, but I told you the story, Jeff, in 1982 on opening day. George Wright, I've told you the story many times, got 3 hits on opening day, and he told me it was the first major league game he'd ever attended. So I told that story to Steve Sparks a few years ago, and he told me a story that I didn't know. And I was the beat guy for the Rangers at the time. He told me the reason George Wright was even on the team on opening day that year was that Mickey Rivers, the primary center fielder, faked a hamstring injury, so he would start on the disabled list, and George Wright would make the team. So I had never heard that story before until Steve Sparks told me that. And it was almost 40 years after the fact. And I repeat, I was the beat guy. I'm supposed to know this stuff. And 40 years later, a former pitcher told me a story that I didn't know. It was just great. And ever since then, Steve Sparks has told me 36 stories that I'd never heard before.
And many of those you're going to hear. Steve Sparks joins Is This a Great Game or What? Coming up next.
Our special guest this week is Steve Sparks, former major league pitcher and a broadcaster doing games for the Houston Astros. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. This is my son, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff, how you doing, man?
Hey, Steve. Well, you opened up by saying you haven't missed a single episode of the podcast, which I am just so flattered. We are so flattered. It's our little family-run side gig that we love to do so much.
You know, I feel like even before today, I was part of the family. I felt like I already knew you, Jeff, before we even started today.
Right.
So we end every episode with thank you for being a part of the family. And I came up with that after our second episode. And I had a buddy of mine who consults podcasts. And he called me and said, "Did you come up with that? I thought I was consulting your podcast. That's the best close ever." I said, "No, I got nervous. I didn't know what else to call him." So you're part of the family, Steve Sparks. Thank you for being our guest today.
Right.
Love to be here.
We were just talking about how little Steve sleeps because he's coming back from knee replacement surgery. So, Jeff, this was a month ago. I get a text in the middle of the night from Steve Sparks, and here's what it said. Jose Altuve's height is the same as his birthday. He's 5'6", and he's born on May the 6th. And I'm thinking, Steve, you are the weirdest man in the world that you would come up with that. Where did you see that? How did you put that together? That's what I do for a living. You're not supposed to steal good stuff like that.
I would only text that to somebody at 4:30 in the morning to the weirdest person I know. Now, you sent me a couple of your books last year, and I know how your mind works. And to be honest with you, because of that, I started to look at things a little differently from time to time as a broadcaster and things like that. I remember when I saw Altuve's birthday, I said, "Oh my gosh, that's the same as his listed height."
Right.
So, I did run through a couple of other dates. Some guys 5'10",
right,
and 5'11", and there's a couple, but it's a very small club.
Right.
Dad, thankfully you're not born in April, or else you would have been able to possibly say your height was the same as your.
Well, that's really funny, Jeff. Really tall Jeff. Jeffrey's born on August the 9th. So as it turns out, this is perfect. He and I together are 8'9". He's 4'6", and I'm 4'3". It's absolutely perfect.
It looks like, Dad, you and I both had height jokes loaded up for this, didn't we?
Well, not the point. Steve, my favorite thing about uniform numbers and names on the back and all that, Carlos May, well before your time, Carlos May used to wear number 17. So the back of his jersey said May, his name, 17, and that was his birthday.
You're kidding.
So not only has he got his name and number on the back,
That's
He's
brilliant.
got his birthday on the back. I
Hey,
mean,
at one point, I couldn't wait when Tyler Clippard was playing for the Twins to say that he's the only guy that had his monogram on his cap for TC
TC.
Twin Cities.
All right,
Wow.
Steve, again, where does this analytical, observant curiosity come from? Have you always been like this as a kid? Were you figuring out weird stuff as a kid? Because not many former players look at things the way that you do.
Hey, I've been married for 36 years, and I don't think there's 2 days that go by where my wife doesn't tell me how weird I am. So I've been like this my whole life. My parents know it. You know, my mom and dad listen to every game I broadcast still. My mom will text 10 seconds after every game from Tulsa, Oklahoma. But it's just been a lifelong passion of mine. And to be able to play the game and now broadcast and be in this game for almost 40 years has been a dream come true.
Well, Steve, let's start with you. Let's start with your career. Tell us how you ended up going to Sam State, where Randy Galloway, one of my all-time mentors in the business, former columnist of the Dallas Morning News, that's where he went. How did you end up becoming a pitcher in college?
Well, I mentioned I'm from Oklahoma. I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the weather wasn't particularly good for baseball, especially early in the season. And in junior college, I went to junior college at Eastern Oklahoma State College, and the weather was even worse because you played in the fall and you played in the spring, and it was even worse. And at one point, as an infielder in junior college, I bent down to field a ground ball and actually cracked a vertebrae in my back because I was so stiff. You know, even if you stretched out there in that cold, windy weather, you still weren't able to get very flexible or pliable to be able to do your job. So I remember after my sophomore year, I didn't have a lot of offers, you know, to go play further. So I knew if I walked on somewhere, I wanted to go somewhere warmer. And I'd never heard of Sam Houston State. Even you, Tim, you just said Sam State. I mean, who knows Sam Houston State? But one thing I read in the library at my junior college about Sam Houston State was that the winter temperature was 51 degrees. I said, 51, I'm in. So I decided to further my academic career at Sam Houston State because of the weather in the winter. So I went there and I walked on. There was almost 100 guys walking on. And as an infielder, Jeff, you can probably relate to this. You got to be pretty fast. And I remember running a 60-yard dash time as one of those walk-ons. And when I heard the guy with the stopwatch say 7, I didn't hear what he said after that. But as soon as he said 7, it wasn't in the 6s. I panicked. And I'd gone about 20 feet past him. And by the time I walked back to the guy with the stopwatch, I formulated something in my mind. I don't know how, but I came up with these words. I said, "Hey, man, what are the pitchers doing running?" He goes, "Hey, man, you're in the wrong spot." And that's the day I started pitching. It changed my life forever. That one little lie, the 10 seconds I was able to formulate that one little lie changed my life forever.
You know, Steve, my mom taught me one thing growing up, which was, you know, hey, just say yes, right? Just say yes, and we'll try to figure it out later. And I had a very small, minimal acting career as a kid, and I'll never forget, they were considering me for this role in Washington, D.C. in the Shakespeare Theater Company, and they go, "Do you happen to play the trombone?" And through my head was my mom saying, "Just say yes." So I said, "Yeah, I mean, I'm musical. I play the piano. So I didn't want to lie, but for you to think on your feet that quickly, it's kind of that same instinct of just say yes, figure out a way to get there, and we'll figure it out when we get there."
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
So, Steve, how did you go from, all right, now I'm a pitcher because I ran over 7 in the 60-yard dash, to becoming a pitcher? How long did that take, and what did you do to get there?
Well, Tim, I had 2 years to figure it out. I was a junior by then, but I had a pretty good arm. And I threw a lot of fastballs. I was a reliever. And I remember going home my Christmas break when we kind of had an exit meeting with our head coach my senior year. And he just told me, "Hey, I've got you pretty low down on the depth chart, you know." And I told him, "Man, I want to be a pro baseball player." And he just didn't think it was going to be possible. But we had a couple of guys end up failing some classes, not being eligible to start the spring season. Had one guy get hurt, and I got a spot start. And I ended up pitching pretty well that year and got drafted in the 5th round by the Brewers. So by my senior year, I figured out enough of a breaking ball to kind of get to go along with that fastball, and I learned the rest in the minor leagues. And it wasn't a short stint in the minor leagues. I ended up pitching 10 years in the minor leagues. But I turned 31 my rookie year. But it was a long curve. But I kind of changed my career as a knuckleballer halfway through it. And that's probably the biggest reason why I was so old when I got there.
All right, we'll get to the knuckleball in a minute, Steve. But tell us about Brewer time. And how you knew Bob Uecker. Tell us about Bob Uecker in the time that you knew him.
Well, we got pretty close, just the times that I got to spring training, and he had caught Phil Necro when he was a catcher in the Braves organization, got to know Phil pretty well. So I knew that, and I would go to Bob on occasion to talk about, some different things that he would notice with Phil. And of course, he had the most famous line of all time on how to actually catch the knuckleball, which they pretty much every broadcaster would say every time I pitched. My mom was about to throw up by the end of my career. But he would say, wait till the ball quit rolling and pick it up. So, but he was unbelievable to me. He was, we all knew how funny he was and how affable he was, but he was very caring and generous with his time. And we just kind of hit it off. I'd go fishing with him whenever we'd go back, me as a broadcaster, in the last few years, we had some really deep conversations. And I remember the last time I had a conversation with Uecker. As a matter of fact, Tim, he told me that within the last year, he had had conversations with Bob Gibson and Hank Aaron, real late in their lives, as a matter of fact. And they told them at the end of a 30-minute conversation that they really wanted to call him just to have a couple of laughs. And they wanted to hear his voice one last time because they were probably not going to make it very long. And those two guys in particular, and Bob was telling me this with tears in his eyes, that they both passed away that day. So Jeff, he was one of the last guys they talked to.
Jeff, how great is that story? Two of the greatest players ever made sure they called Bob Uecker before they died so they could hear his voice. So we talk about Mr. Funny. He's the funniest man I've ever seen in a major league uniform. But there was another side to him that was just as deep and profound. Really impressive. Yeah.
Yep. So, Steve, you had mentioned, 10 years in the minor leagues. I actually had the opportunity to work at the Frederick Keys, which was the greatest job, greatest internship I ever had. If anybody listening right now is in college or in high school, I advise you to go get an internship with your local minor league team or summer ball team or even something in the Cape Cod League, because it'll be the best time of your life as a young person in a minor league stadium for multiple days a week. For you, the thing I love about minor league baseball is I feel like it's baseball in its purest. It's also entertainment. It's fun. In those years, did you ever have a run-in with a giveaway or a mascot or something, that just only happens in minor league games? Were you ever dressing up and helping out with a bit or doing something that these crazy minor league stadiums love to do, or an experience of your time in the minors?
Yeah, Steve, you got to remember, Jeffrey dressed up as a taco package more than once in a race around the bases, so he knows a little bit about this.
Well, let's not get too hot takey. It was just the mild. Somebody else was the hot, and somebody else was the spicy. So
I actually put on the taco costume in San Antonio one day. I stole it out of the mascot's little locker room there in fielded batting practice in the outfield one day. And that guy was so mad at me. I mean, it was unbelievable. And it stunk unbelievably. I can't believe he was mad like I was going to taint it or something. But we had a great time, man. My teammates loved me just running around with that lettuce flying out everywhere. There's a couple of stories about the minor leagues. In the minor leagues, you're talking about a family with this podcast, man. The minor leagues become family. Lifelong friends for me. A lot of guys I still, consider some of my best friends. But one, Bob Feller was going to promote a book that he had written. I was in Salinas, California. I was pitching for the Stockton Ports in the California League. And Bob Feller was there to promote the book. He was going to throw out the first pitch. And he was in the locker room on a day I was starting. So I didn't have to go out for batting practice. I was the only one in the clubhouse. So I went up to Bob Feller and I just wanted to say hello and of course meet him. I'm such a big fan of baseball, and I told him so. And he said, "Well, Steve," he goes, "you're pitching today, huh?" I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "How old are you?" I said, "Well, I'm 27 years old." He said, "Excuse me?" I said, "I'm 27 years old." He goes, "Christ, son, what are you doing with your life?" I'd won 150 games and served 2 terms in the war by the time I was 27. You need to rethink this. And I think I gave up 5 runs in the first inning.
That is so classic. So he was right, but he blasted a 27-year-old for still trying.
Yep. He was not wrong. He wasn't wrong. And I wish more people had heard it, but it was classic.
Well, wow. Steve, I don't know if I've told you this, but I batted against Bob Feller in the minor leagues when he did his tour of minor league ballparks, and I covered the Alexandria Dukes and A-ball team, and he came and threw to the writers who covered the team. Now, granted, this is like 3 years out of high school for me. I played in high school. I could swing a bat a little bit, and he's throwing like 60 miles an hour. So I hit a couple balls hard, then he wouldn't throw any more strikes. Not the point. When I was done, Steve, he gives us a certificate that's about this big. And it says, I batted against Bob Feller with my name on it. And in gigantic print at the bottom, it says, the aforementioned slugger realizes if he had faced Mr. Feller in his prime, the results would have been different. Like, no, I would have lit him up in 1940. What are you, crazy?
He just wanted to remind you.
Yes, make sure that I knew I would not put a ball, I would not make contact against him, 50 years earlier. Of course I knew that. It was wonderful.
That's awesome. Hey, I had a manager that same year who pitched or had caught in the major leagues and had 5 kids. We were in the California League, and at the end of the season with 3 weeks left, his wife ended up taking his 4 youngest kids back home to Arizona to get ready for the off season. So for the rest of the season, the last 3 weeks, his 9-year-old son ended up staying with his dad. He would come to the ballpark, he would hang out in the clubhouse, and just basically became part of the team. And he would also be in the hotel rooms with his dad. And back in those days, of course, you had your phones in the hotel room. So he would call the front office and his son would hear those things and things of that nature. So Ben, his son, was at the ballpark one day in Bakersfield. We were stretching before batting practice. And we were all just kind of laying there doing our hamstring stretches and such. And Ben was weaving around and we were tackling him and punching him and doing all these things, and he was having a great time. Then he went up to this one guy and goes, "Hey, John, hey, I'm going to miss you." He goes, "Oh, Ben, are you going home with your brothers and sisters?" He goes, "No, I'm not going anywhere. You are." And we all poked our heads up. We go, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I heard my dad talking on the phone. You're getting released right after the game."
Stop.
And we are just silent. He goes, "Yeah, you and Scott both." And then we all looked at Scott. He goes, "Yeah, you guys are getting released right after the game. I heard my dad." So they both got up. We're in shock, and they both go inside, and we never saw them again. That's how they got released from professional baseball. They got released by
an 8-year-old. Oh,
yep.
my God.
That's how they got released. That's their story for the rest of their lives. How humiliating is that?
That is penultimate, one of my favorite stories we've ever heard on the podcast right there.
Crazy.
That is hilarious. You tell so many great stories. So we asked about the knuckleball. Tell us, because I love the knuckleball. I've written all sorts of stories about the knuckleball. I knew Phil Niekro well. I met Hoyt Wilhelm a bunch of times. I batted against Charlie Huff in a simulated game. We'll go over that some other time. How did you become a knuckleball pitcher, and how long did it take for you to be really good at it?
It's pretty interesting, and I've had this conversation with a lot of guys since then that have asked me for advice, and I'm sure that have asked a lot of the other knuckleballers. There's not many left, by the way, after the passing of Tim Wakefield. But what the Brewers did, they realized I was having a hard time getting out of Double-A. Part of it was I had marginal stuff. If my command wasn't really good, I was going to have a hard time getting by. And the other part, we were playing at the old Dudley Dome in downtown El Paso where the ball flew out of there and just made matters worse. But they thought I might be a good candidate for the knuckleball because I had pretty simple mechanics. It's helpful to be a little shorter. I'm only 6 foot tall. Sorry, guys. And then, they felt like I might have the temperament for that pitch too. So they gave me a 3-year plan. They came up to me toward the end of one season. They said, "Hey, we want to bring you to an instructional league and see if you might be able to throw a knuckleball. And we'll give you a 3-year plan to throw it 30% the first year, 50% the second year, and 70% the third year. and we'll kind of see where we're at after that. So the first 2 years I got worse. And what I had done, and I know you guys like to rip packs, I went to all my baseball cards to see how guys held it. I'd never thrown one before. So I was looking for knuckleballs. I was looking at Charlie Huff, all the guys that you just mentioned, at how they held it. And it was all trial and error. We had Bob Humphrey, who threw the knuckleball a little bit as a big leaguer with the St. Louis Cardinals. He was on that 64 World Series champion team, and he was our minor league coordinator. But it just asked questions. And I finally got a hold of Candiotti after a minor league season, and I asked him probably two to 3 pages worth of questions that I had one day at the Astrodome after my minor league season. And I wrote them down after he left, and I went to winter ball that year, and I threw it 100% of the time in Los Mochis. That's when I got better. When I tried to throw it 30%, and when I tried to throw it 50%, I got worse. But once I committed to it and threw it in tough counts, that's when I got a lot better. So never really, I never became one of the better knuckleballers, but I carved out a 9-year career as a big leaguer, which I'm very proud of. But man, if it wasn't for the knuckleball, I never would have been able to do that.
Yeah. Jeff, I covered a guy named Daniel Boone who played in the major leagues. He made a comeback a second time. He played a little bit, then he made a comeback, and he weighed literally 140 pounds. Even
Yes.
I weigh a little bit more than that. So Daniel Boone comes back as a knuckleball pitcher, and he is a direct descendant of the Daniel Boone. So I got to talking to him about the Daniel Boone, like how courageous and brave he must have been. And Daniel Boone, the pitcher, looks at me and he goes, I promise you, he didn't have the courage to throw a knuckleball with 3-2 count with the bases loaded in the 9th inning. Steve, that's true, right? You have to have unbelievable courage to throw that pitch, right?
I used to joke about this, but it was kind of a joke and it kind of wasn't. To throw that pitch to guys like Dave Winfield and Frank Thomas and some of these guys that were just hitting absolute screamers up the middle. You did. I used to joke to reporters every once in a while, I would just throw it as slow as I could so I could back up a little bit. It was brutal. I mean, it was tough. Like when you didn't have a good one and you weren't taking the spin off the ball, and there's going to be days like this. And Phil Niekro, I remember telling Wakefield and myself, he said, you know what, just change speeds as much as you can. If you don't have a good one that day, at least you can get them off stride a little bit. So you learn that as you go. It's not that easy, but there's a lot of nuance to that pitch. I'm not sure if it's ever going to make a really true comeback, but I'd love to see somebody to zig when everybody else is zagging. When you look at spin rate, right? It's the ultimate non-spin rate, and velocity. Everybody's chasing velocity, and it's anti-velocity too.
Yeah, Charlie Huff got mad at me one time. Love Charlie Huff, still do. I said, Charlie, why don't more guys throw the knuckleball? This is 40 years ago, I asked him. He goes, well, why don't more guys throw 100 miles an hour? It's really hard to do. So that's when I learned that anyone who thinks, Wade Boggs, I can throw a great knuckleball, it's not the same when you have to go out, throw it in a major league game, and get big league hitters out.
It is. It's tough. And I would say that the Astros have had me look at guys on the minor league side in spring trainings over the years. And I could tell within maybe, Jeff, 3 minutes whether or not a guy could actually make the transition. And it's usually because they're tightly wound. And I just know you've got to be super relaxed to be able to throw that pitch and have a very low heart rate when it matters most. And that's the guys who end up pitching well. And Tim, you know this from getting to know Huff and the Niekro brothers and Tom Candiotti and Tim Wakefield. All those guys have a pretty even keel temperament.
Right, absolutely. And as you know, Steve, you love this stuff. Joe Niekro batted 1,200 times in the big leagues. He hit 1 home run in his career, and he hit it off his brother Phil. Again, the beauty of baseball. How can that possibly happen? But these things happen in baseball all the time, which is
how about Hoyt Wilhelm's homer?
Right. Hoyt Wilhelm, Jeff, hit a home run in the first major league game he ever played, and it was the only home run that he ever hit. And then like 3 games later, he hit a triple. And then he never hit another triple for his entire career. And he played like 100 years. It was unbelievable.
So funny.
So good.
So, Steve, I want to ask and pivot here just a little bit because there's I love baseball so much, as you can tell, and there's one thing that is so true, and that's the nicknames people are given. You were given a nickname in baseball. You were given Phonebook as your nickname. Can you explain the origin of that?
Yeah, I can explain the origin of that. Now, nobody's ever called me Phonebook, but I have seen that in Baseball Reference as nicknames.
Right.
But
Right.
there's a reason why it's there,
Right.
and it's a pretty crazy story. I was in spring training for the first time in big league camp after 8 years in the minors. In 1994, I'm in the camp with the Milwaukee Brewers, and Sal Bando was the general manager of that team, and he decided to bring a group of guys for a chapel service that were like the strength team, the power team. If you've seen these guys, they blow up the hot water bottles and they explode. They bend bars with their teeth. And the other thing they do is they tear phone books and but they put on a great spectacle, and it was a lot of fun, and we enjoyed it. And we were talking about it the next day during a rain delay. And I remember Jesse Orozco, Mike Fetters, myself were talking about it. And back then, Tim, there were yellow pages. There was actually a payphone in our stupid locker room in spring training in Chandler, Arizona. So we get them, and we're going to say, there's got to be a trick to it. So we're all trying, and none of us can even make it budge. Couldn't figure it out at all. So we're still talking, and we're just hanging out in the locker room. So I start peeling off a few of the pages just to cheat a little bit and try to get a head start. And sure enough, once I got enough of them a little bit torn, I could make a little headway. So I stood up and I started acting like I'm tearing this thing, and I'm making some headway. I'm about halfway through, and everybody's starting to crowd around, and they're chanting "Sparky, Sparky." So I start wiggling my head, and then all of a sudden I dislocate my left shoulder. Dislocate. And some of the guys weren't sure if I was faking it or what, but it did. That's exactly what I did. And I go to the hospital. They put it back in, and of course, I end up going back down to minor league camp. Don't get back up to the big leagues that year, so it pushes my career back a year. I was supposed to make the team that year, and I'll never forget Sal Bando and Phil Garner calling me into the office the day that they sent me down to minor league camp. I was sitting on a chair, and they were standing on top of me, and Garner had spit flying off of his mustache into my face, and this is no joke. My dad was a very calm, disciplinarian. When somebody would yell at me in football practice, it just didn't have the same effect as it did when somebody would talk a little bit more logical. But when those guys, when Garner especially, it just seemed so ludicrous. I felt like I was about to start laughing. So I had to start thinking about relatives dying, my dog dying, whatever I could just to get through that meeting so I wouldn't get relieved. But so the story came out, Jeff. The story came out that this longtime minor league guy that jumped up on stage with those guys and dislocated my throwing shoulder, and whether or not
Right.
And in reality, it was my non-throwing shoulder. It was the sixth time I dislocated it. Ended up dislocating it 15 times and had 3 reconstructions on it. But the story came out, and it still vacillates. Every year, somebody will do something stupid, and they'll come up with a new list, 1 through 10, stupidest sports injuries of all time. And Steve Sparks is anywhere from number 4 to 7. Just vacillates every single time. And I get guys from, Sam Houston State in the minor leagues are always texting me, there's a new list, and I'm always in there. Stupidest sports injuries. I'm not saying it wasn't stupid, but it was a little bit overblown.
Steve, my dad always said, hey, you can break your foot playing basketball, playing baseball, but don't break it doing something stupid. In my first year out of college, I don't even think my dad knows this. We were drinking beers in a buddy's apartment, and nobody had a bottle opener. So I said, yeah, here we go. I'll do it. Tried to do it with my teeth, successfully, mind you. Totally chipped my back tooth. Just had gotten my own health insurance, and here I am in the dentist's office a couple days later saying, I don't know what happened. It just kind of came off.
Right. Tim, are you going to tell him he's grounded or me?
Look, Jeff's 21st birthday, I said to him, Jeff, let me go buy you a beer, okay? This is like official. It was midnight, the night he was turning 21 years old.
Got
and
a
he
natty
looks
light?
Yeah, and I said... He knows the natural light story. Oh my gosh. So I said, Jeff, let me buy you a beer. And my 21-year-old son says, why don't we have a couple shots first? And I think, oh my God, I have had 2 shots in my entire life. And that is the truth. As it turns out, he's had more shots than Carmelo Anthony. It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
and he's only 21 years old.
He was 4 years in.
Yeah, no doubt. And a couple months after that, Steve, was my graduation at Syracuse, and my parents went to Chuck's, which is like the bar for seniors, right?
Okay.
And my parents came for the beginning of the evening. My dad put his card down and said, hey, order some drinks. And then they were like, hey, we're heading home after about an hour. And he said, but I left the card with a tab open. You just have fun, be responsible, but have fun. Now, Steve, I love my dad. He's my best friend. I genuinely never would take advantage of him. So I got another friend of mine, and I said, we need to be careful because we're going to get out of hand tonight. We got to make sure. So we're throughout the night. We're like kind of keeping track in our mind. We're trying to figure it out. Here I am scared for the next 4 hours at this bar thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna rack up $1,000 bill. Well, I wasn't thinking that this place has concrete floors, $3 pitchers,
plastic cups,
$2 mixed drinks. And I got the bill at the end of the night, and me and my buddy were there, and I said, I'm so scared, $86.10. So I give the card
And your
next
dad
to him.
still got mad.
Right. I gave the card to him the next day, and he goes, I don't care, but tell me how much you spent. And I said, with or without tip? He said, with tip, Jeff. I said, it was like $110. And he's like, wow, I'm actually kind of impressed. So I said, all right. Woo.
That's crazy.
No more drinking. Steve, you're the best storyteller in the world. Tell us the story, which I had never heard, about Cliff Lee going to a World Series game and tell us that story.
Okay. 2009, Cliff Lee is going to pitch game 1 of the World Series in New York. He's pitching for the Philadelphia Phillies. And he decides to not go on the team buses and stay in the hotel a little bit longer so he doesn't have to hang out in the clubhouse where it's chaotic, right? So what he doesn't plan on, that it's a Monday or Tuesday night, I can't remember which one, but it's middle of the week in New York, rush hour, game 1 of the World Series. He doesn't plan on the traffic. So he gets in a taxi and he's not moving for 30 minutes. So he starts to panic. Still enough time where he doesn't have to full-blown panic, but he starts to panic. So he calls his agent, and then he calls the clubhouse manager of the Phillies, who's in the clubhouse at Yankee Stadium, and tells him about his predicament. And then he goes, hey, tell Charlie Manuel that, I'm in trouble. I might be late. I'm not sure what's going on. He goes, I'm not telling Charlie anything. He'll have a heart attack. I said, tell you what you do. You find a policeman, tell him what's going on, and maybe they can help you get here. He said, okay, that's what my agent told me to. So he goes outside for 15 minutes. He can't find a cop. So he finally bites the bullet and goes to the subway, and it is packed. He doesn't even get on a train for 30 minutes. And he finally gets on a train, and slow as can be, finally gets to the stadium, and it's 35 minutes before first pitch. And he gets outside of Yankee Stadium, and he realizes, oh my gosh, I've never been here. It's the first year of the new Yankee Stadium. He'd been to the old one, but not the new one. And he doesn't know how to get in. So he calls the clubhouse manager again. He said, hey, how do I get in? He goes, what does it look like where you are? So he tells him something that's big out there, and he sends a clubhouse kid outside, gets Cliff Lee. They race downstairs. He gets his uniform on, runs out to the outfield, runs a couple sprints, gets ready for the game, and throws a CG, 1 run, no walks, 10 strikeouts, and beats CC Sabathia, I think 5-1 in game 1 of that World Series. And Charlie Manuel never found out.
Wow, that is unbelievable. Offshoot to that, the new Yankee Stadium, the first time I ever went, Kevin Cash was on the Yankees, and we arrived at the stadium at the same time. And they wouldn't let me in because they didn't know who I was. And then they wouldn't let Kevin Cash in. And he had to tell him, I'm a player on the team. I play for the Yankees. And the security guy goes, no, you don't play for the Yankees. And Kevin Cash had to beg his way into opening day at the new stadium because they didn't believe that he was a player. Oh,
that's so funny. That's great.
Baseball stories are so good. So again, Steve, tell us the one that you told me about Alex Bregman, former Astro, now tearing it up for for the Red Sox. Tell us that story that you told me about how smart a player he is.
Yeah, I think it was 2018, and it was our last series of the year. I'm a radio broadcaster for the Astros. Last series of the year against the Baltimore Orioles, and my wife meets me on the road, and it's the day before the series begins. And Jeff, my wife and I just went down to the bar just to have a drink, and Alex was down there, and Alex and I were talking for a little bit. And Bregman tells me, "Hey, watch what I do during this series." I go, "Why?" He goes, I'm going to break as many bats as I can." I go, "What?" He goes, I'm going to let everybody jam me. I'm going to break bats. And I know that the Cleveland advanced scout will be in the stands, and they're going to think that they can get inside on me in the first round of the playoffs. I go, "What?" And sure enough, I'm calling these games. Bregman goes, I think 1 for 11 or 1 for 12 in this series. Has an infield, slow rolling, swinging bunt hit off of a broken bat. And true to form, I mean, he was brutal. Just got blown up inside. Then the first 2 games of the series against Cleveland, I'll be darned if they don't try to get inside on him twice. And I think he took Kluber deep, then he took Trevor Bauer deep in each of those games. And he hit like 500 in that series, and the Astros rolled on. And he was by far the best hitter on the team, even at a young age. But he set up their advanced scout, just with that last series of the season. That's the way he thought.
But Steve, doesn't that personify what a great baseball player does? Not only are their skills ridiculously high, but they outthink everybody too. Isn't that what you've gathered all your years when you played, the guys you played with, the guys you played against? They all outperformed, but they also outprepared everybody?
It's a good point. And I think it's a big reason why you could probably pull a lot of players throughout time. And a lot of these really good players had bigger brothers. And they're always trying to figure out a way to stay with their big brothers, figure out little nuanced things to try to get better. I played with a guy. I grew up with a guy. Remember Rick Rona?
Yes, of course.
He was a catcher for the Chicago Cubs.
WRONA, right.
That's right, yeah.
Right.
And he had 2 older brothers that played pro ball. His dad got to AAA with the Tulsa Oilers. But we grew up together, and he was heady, man. He was way above everybody else. And I actually got to play with him when he was in AAA at the end of his career. He's 30 years old. He's our catcher. And he's trying to get to the big leagues and understands he's not a good hitter, but understands if he's going to get back up to the Milwaukee Brewers in the big leagues, he's going to have to throw out runners. But he was getting very frustrated because our pitchers weren't helping him out. So he devises a plan with our shortstop. And the next game, this is what happened. Rona is behind home plate. He catches the ball. And of course, the guy gets a 5-step head start because the pitcher's got a big leg kick and he knows he's got no shot. So Rona throws a pop fly to the shortstop. And the shortstop starts waving his hands up in the air like it's a pop fly. And the runner looks up, and Rona's back at home plate yelling, "Back, back, back." And the runner looks up and runs back to first base. No stolen base.
That is brilliant.
You get what I'm saying?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Steve, I've heard of similar things. I've never seen the catcher throw a pop-up to the shortstop to deceive the runner. That is tremendous.
That's what younger brothers do. That's what younger brothers of 2 older siblings do to stay in the game. And that's what Rona did. And of course he got drilled in the ribs his next AB, but it was worth it for him.
Well, Steve, did you have an older brother? Did you have someone that would taught you all of these things?
He didn't. They usually don't teach you.
Right.
You're just in there fending for yourself. But yeah, I played with my brother. He was 5 years older than me, and I wanted to be. He was my idol, and I wanted to be with him and his friends. So yeah, just tried to hang with those guys, and you did whatever it took. And if it was to cheap shot somebody when you had to, or whatever it was, you deal with the consequences later.
Yeah, we had Coach Jim Boeheim of Syracuse on a couple weeks ago, Steve, and he said the younger siblings were always the better basketball players because they had to outsmart their older, bigger brothers. They had to be better ball handlers when they were younger and growing up and smaller.
Yeah.
And that story, Steve, just reminds me of what we would do in Little League. I was a Little League umpire, and I had a team. They must have done this every other weekend because I had umpired and seen it twice from the same team where the catcher throws down, the second base clearly not even close to catching the runner, but the center fielder, the second baseman, and the shortstop all sell that the ball is now in the outfield. The kid takes a step off, the guy grabs the ball, tag him, boom, out. And they did that twice just in games I umpired, and it was expertly crafted for Little League kids.
So that coach was a younger brother.
Right.
Right?
I'm absolutely certain he was. So Steve is a big digger, Jeff. He digs for information, which again is unusual for a former player. Tell us what you dug up the other day about Kelvin Sampson and some people that he coached.
Okay, so Kelvin Sampson, of course, University of Houston basketball coach, and they go to the championship game this year, and they were celebrated at Dyken Park, the Astros ballpark, last night. So he comes in the booth with us. So I was digging up on some information about Kelvin, and I realized, I think I'd heard Jeff or Tim mention this before, that there's 12 guys that have played in both the major leagues and the NBA. Weren't you talking with Boeheim about that?
Yes, I
know Chuck
had
Connors,
the
some of these
all
guys.
major league team of players who played either at a really high level collegiately or played in the NBA, Dave DeBusschere and others. And Jim Boeheim, of course, knew them all. So go ahead.
So NBA, Major League Baseball, there's 12, I found out. But there's only one that had played at least 4 years in each. And that's Mark Hendrickson, left-handed pitcher, started his career with Toronto, pitched with Tampa and a couple other teams.
Baltimore, right, yeah.
But the kicker to that was his head coach in college basketball was Kelvin Sampson. Then I started to dig a little bit more, and I saw where Hendrickson was drafted. And he was drafted 31st, I believe, in the 1996 draft, and the pick right after him. And Jeff, I think you know Ryan Miner. And of course, he played in the NBA and in the Major League Baseball with the Baltimore Orioles. You probably ran into him in the minor leagues, right?
Yeah, he was the Frederick Keys manager when I was little old intern there.
You know who his head coach was in college basketball?
No.
Kelvin Sampson at Oklahoma.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is so great. And of course, Ryan Miner was the third baseman the night that Cal Ripken's consecutive game streak ended on a Sunday night when Ripken took himself out. He wasn't injured. He just thought it was time, but that was Ryan Miner. And Jeff, you had the time of your life that summer in Frederick working with Ryan Miner and the others running around as a taco package and everything, right?
Yeah, Ryan Miner, may he rest in peace, taken away from us way too soon. On the night that I ran as one of the Taco Bell sauce packets at the Frederick Keys game, I went in to do my post-game interviews, and I wanted to talk to some players, wanted to talk to Ryan Miner. I said, they didn't win that game, and I said, all right, so what do you feel like went wrong out there? And he said, well, besides your form running. And then the interview was done at that point. He said, I couldn't get another question out. He was such a great manager and such a great guy, and was my introduction into covering a baseball team. So big shout out to Ryan Miner. I'm so glad you brought him up on this episode, Steve. This is great.
So good. All right. So Steve, we have to let you go, even though we would keep you for hours if we could. But just just tell me, you told me that your wife, you've been married for 36 years, and every other day she reminds you of how weird that you are. Give us something else that you are weird at, other than finding that Jose Altuve is born on May the 6th and he's 5'6". Is there any other odd things that you do, you collect, you think about, anything that makes you unusual? Because poor Jeff lives with poor Papa here, and he's got some strange idiosyncrasies himself.
My condolences, Jeff. So yes, I collected baseball cards my whole life. Still have them all. And my son and I, he's 29 years old now. We'll go through them every once in a while. We have a great time with that. But I will become a Seamhead the day that this happens, and I look for it every day, and I have for the last 3 or 4 years. I always look at the number on Baseball Reference of all-time baseball players, and it's in the 23,000s right now. Right. All time, there's been that many players in baseball, and I cannot wait for the day that it matches up perfectly with that night's attendance at the ballpark that I am. And I always look around before the game, and I can tell that it's going to be somewhere in between 20 and 30,000, or if it's going to be more than 30,000, I won't pay as close attention. But if it's close, and last night it was kind of close, it was within 1,000. But if it ends up being 23,986, the exact number, I will become a Seamhead, because I am going to take a panoramic picture of exactly how many guys have ever played in the major league since the inception of baseball, and I'll have it. I don't think anybody else will.
Steve,
And
you think that will make you a Seamhead? You are a Seamhead. You're one of the great Seamheads I've ever seen. The point is, you don't find many Seamheads who actually played in the big leagues, led the league in complete games one year. It's dopes like me and Jeff who have nothing else to do with our lives. You have something else, and you're still observant like that. I love it.
Well, I can't believe I got to play. It still seems like a dream that I got to play. So, I was a fan, and I'm a fan now, and lucky that I get to broadcast and go to baseball games every night still.
well, Steve, you don't need to hear it from me. I had mentioned the amount of players that played in Major League history, right? And if you took that video, if you took that picture, everybody who sees it would be shocked at how few people that really is.
Right.
When you really think about the history of our game, that stadium, I mean, it's not even filling the smallest Major League Baseball ballpark. Well, at least not this season, but you get what I'm saying.
It's kind of a bad crowd.
Progressive Field.
It's a bad crowd.
It would be
right.
a small crowd in a lot of ballparks. It wouldn't even fill the smallest Major League ballpark at Progressive Field. And you're one of those guys. And to have you as one of our guests was so great, so special, so many laughs. Thank you, Steve, for joining us.
And Steve, we have to leave with this. You became one of those because you ran the 60 in with 7-something, and then in 10 seconds you said, wait a second, where are the pitchers running? I can't believe you came up with that quickly.
Because I'm slow. Hey, I kind of slipped at the beginning, by the way. I didn't get a great jump.
Right. Well, thank God you slipped, because it led to a Major League career.
A slip got you to the big leagues. You spent all that time. It's so good. Steve, it's been so much fun having you. Jeff, I don't care how corny this sounds. When I do an Astros game and I get to talk to Steve before or after the game, it's just an absolute delight, because he always sees something, tells me something that I would have never thought about in my life. And that's what I'm here for, is to learn more about the game every day. And he has taught me so much.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you to Steve Sparks. So many laughs, Dad. Every minute of that was fantastic.
Right. And I told you, Jeff, when you find someone who's as observant and as curious as he is, those are the people that you latch on to. Mm-hmm. So after we taped that interview, he sent me a text and he said, I found somebody else whose height is the same as his birthday. Just like Jose Altuve, 5'6", born on May the 6th. He said Tommy Edman, pretty hot player for the Dodgers, is 5'9", and he's born on May the 9th. And Steve Sparks sent me a text saying the Astros play the Dodgers in July. And he said, so Tommy Edman will be going up against Jose Altuve. And he said, and I'll be ready for it. So this is so great. 3 months in anticipation of a series in July, he's going to have a 5'6", 5'9" note that nobody else is going to have. That's why we love Steve Sparks.
More Is This a Great Game or What tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening right now. Share the podcast with a friend. And as always, thank you for being a part of our family.